Welcome back, everybody, to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. I'm author and ghost historian Mike Ricksecker. With me, as always, my co-hostess, Vanessa Hogel, and down in the chat room, Shauna, our chat shenanigator, shaking everything up. We have a great episode up for you tonight. Ken Gerhard is in the house, but Vanessa, we have a real quick thing to take care of here first. So it's a big news for the channel and for the show going into 2020. So we're actually going to be moving the Edge of the Rabbit Hole show to its own channel, Edge of the Rabbit Hole channel. So we've provided a link for that in the description, along with a link to Ken's latest book. So go ahead and check those out later on. We'll give you some more details at the end of the show after we've let Ken go. But right now, let's get into Ken Gerhard. So Ken is a widely recognized cryptozoologist and field investigator for the Center of Fortean Zoology, as well as a fellow of the Pangea Institute and consultant for various research organizations. He's researched evidence of mysterious animals, legendary beasts around the world, including Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, enigmatic winged creatures, and even werewolves. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Ken has been on many shows, and I mean, we could probably sit here all day, Ken, and go through your bio because it's pretty extensive. We're just happy to have you on the show. So welcome.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. So I guess first, because it is to some people kind of a cryptic word, just kind of the basic things. What exactly is cryptozoology?
Yes, well, cryptozoology comes from the Latin words crypto, which means hidden, and zoology, which means the study of animals. So it's basically the study of hidden animals. And those are animals that are not recognized by mainstream science. And a lot of those tend to be some of the more romantic legendary beasts like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, so on and so forth. There's a whole range of mysterious creatures that have been reported for centuries around the globe. The great sea serpent, the Tasmanian tiger, and so on and so forth. So basically it's the study of those, specifically those creatures, and we refer to them as cryptids.
Yeah, and it's a pretty wide-ranging assortment of different creatures, and I think people think of cryptozoology and they think, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. They kind of, narrow it down to like a couple, but in my brief foray into it, seems like it's a much wider range of different creatures.
Yeah, it is. If you're in cryptozoology, you know about a lot of them. For example, in Africa, there are reports of living dinosaurs. One is known as Mokele Mbembe. It's described as being like an Apatosaurus sauropod type dinosaur. There's something called the Mongolian death worm, which is like a really weird serpentine animal from Mongolia that shoots venom at people. There are different versions of Bigfoot. The orang pendek, or short man, is a small one from Sumatra. The Tasmanian tiger is a presumed to be extinct carnivorous marsupial. So you have all of these mystery cats, black panthers. Thunderbirds is something that I specialize in. So there's a whole range of mysterious animals that have been reported around the world. And most of those, they have anecdotal legends that date back centuries.
Now, with those like that, because you were naming off different areas of the world, do you find that it's a small pool of cryptids that have different descriptions based on geography? Or is it completely different from one area of the world to the other?
Well, that's a good question. But if you look at known animals, and cryptozoology is based heavily on traditional zoology and so on, all the natural sciences. If you look at normal known animals, there are a wide range of adaptations that fit specific habitats. That's the way evolution and adaptation works. So, for example, even within one type of species, so there you have the red fox. The red fox is one of the most widespread mammals in the world. It's all the way from Europe to Asia to North America, South America. There are something like 44 different recognized subspecies of red foxes. Now, to an untrained eye, they might all look like red foxes, but to a scientist or an expert, they would look different. So I don't know if that answered your question, but essentially, if you look at different habitats around the world, you have various types of cryptids that that typically fit well into those particular types of habitats as far as the adaptations that are reported. So yeah, there's a whole range, and they are distinct for different areas and regions.
And you found documentation, or I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. Have you found documentation in different parts of the world dating back from about different cryptids from before there was communication between different areas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For example, the Russian version of Bigfoot, which is known as the Almasty, was documented by a Bavarian nobleman named Schiltberger back in the 14th century. He claimed that he saw a captured Bigfoot or two Bigfoots that were being kept by a nobleman. That's just one example, but you can find others. Ancient Chinese manuscripts. The Loch Ness Monster, allegedly there's an account from the 6th century, Saint Columba, a missionary. So some of them go way back. The Great Sea Serpent. You don't hear a lot of people talk about sea serpents these days, but it's basically like a Loch Ness Monster type of thing that's in the ocean. But as early as the 14th century, there was a guy named Eric Pontoppidan, the Bishop of Bergen, Norway, who was writing about these great sea serpents. So yeah, wow. So you do have a long antiquity on some of the legends. And then you can't disregard the Native American legends. And of course, in cryptozoology, we always listen closely to what Native people say about their animals, because they know they've been living with them for hundreds or thousands of years. So Native Americans, for example, have legends of things like Bigfoot that date back centuries, or lake monsters, thunderbirds, things like that.
Wow. See, that's what really melts my butter, is knowing that there was no way for people to communicate with each other, no way to share stories, yet something that happened here could be so similar, except for the name, to something that happened in Eastern Europe or Asia or something like that. So I always wonder how people can disregard those stories when there was absolutely no explanation for such similar accounts.
Well, I'm absolutely on your side, Vanessa. I find that to be corroborating evidence. But a skeptic could argue that as human beings, that there are different cultural phenomenon that go on, and that sometimes people have certain, like the myth of a man ape, something like Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an anthropomorphic creature, so it combines features. It's basically ourselves. It's like a wilder version of ourselves, right? It looks a lot like us. It lives in the woods. So it would not be, and again, I'm arguing from a skeptical point of view. They might say, okay, well, that archetype is a good type of monster, or something that we all want to believe in, that exists, because it affects us on many different levels, sociologically and psychologically and stuff. So that, but I'm with you. I think I typically look at it the other way, which is a lot of these legends from around the world corroborate each other. And you're right, they're from cultures that were separated, had no way to communicate. As you know, many of those cultures for thousands of years, before the internet, if there are any kids listening in, they would sit around fires, and they were storytellers, and that's how they would pass down, by word of mouth, traditions. And sometimes they would make artwork, tribal masks, ceremonial masks, or carvings, or things to kind of represent some of these stories of these creatures.
I'm fascinated by that. I didn't mean to take over my copying.
No, you're good. You're good. When there's good conversation going, I just let it go. Couple real quick, few things admin wise here. You guys are throwing down a lot of super chats there, so I want to recognize those real quick. Lambie Pie 25 had a $15 super chat. It says, "So happy for y'all! Can't wait for 2020. Thanks so much, Mike, Shauna, and my lovely Vanessa." Thank you very much. Robert Hanna, $2 super chat. Joe Chandler, $20 super chat. She says, "In honor of Hidden Gems, episode 1, and Mike's award, love you guys." And Trucker David Y with a $5 super chat.
Thank you.
Says, "I know it's been a while, but stopping by to show my HRM love." So thank you all very, very much for that. We absolutely appreciate it.
And for all of our trucker people who watch and listen to this show, especially if you're in the north, please be safe. The weather is not good in a lot of areas, and we're all thinking about you.
Absolutely. So kind of piggybacking off of what you guys were talking about with the corroborating evidence over, I mean, really thousands of years, these different cultures, and the stories are matching up. Different things like cave drawings are matching up. So my question, because I'm really interested in ancient history and ancient civilizations, how many of these cryptids that are out there are actually creatures that our ancient ancestors actually witnessed, and maybe there's only a few around these days and are still around? How many of these are actually, those creatures from back then?
Well, a lot of times we look to prehistoric survivors. That's, kind of a loose, or living fossils is kind of a term I use.
Okay.
Basically, pockets of animals that, as you suggest, outlived their presumed extinction date. And, you have to know a little bit about the geological time scale as it pertains to zoology and different movements. But, the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, ended about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And there were a lot of amazing animals during that time period: the woolly mammoths, the woolly rhinos, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths. A lot of those things, the Earth's climate changed so much that they died out, presumably. But there are reports of things that look like some of those different, Pleistocene type animals match the descriptions of many of the cryptids. So that's one of the theories. And there is a precedent, something that we in cryptozoology always refer to, which is a fish known as the coelacanth, Latin name Latimeria columni. And this was a fossil fish that was actually, it actually had like limb-like fins. It was basically a precursor to amphibians and lungfish. So it was kind of like a bridge species. But scientists had fossils of the coelacanth fish, millions of years ago, from like 250, from the Devonian era up until about maybe 65 million years ago. And then they disappeared in the fossil history. So it was always assumed that these fish went extinct. And they're big fish. They're about 5 feet long, 120 pounds. And then in 1938, one was caught off the coast of South Africa. And so suddenly this fish that was presumed extinct for 64 million years is suddenly now alive in our world. Now, granted, it's in the ocean, so that's, it's a little different. But
the ocean's pretty big. So I guess I kind of wonder, did it maybe migrate to different waters? Because the ocean's huge, vast. There's, so many areas of it that we haven't really explored yet. So could it have possibly just migrated into some of these other waters that we just can't get to, and then maybe it kind of wandered off there to the coast of Africa at that time?
Well, absolutely it did, because most of the fossils of this fish had been found in deposits that indicated that it lived in like freshwater, shallow freshwater. And this particular fish has now been documented and found to be living in deep ocean water, off of volcanic islands and stuff. So you also have to understand, it's not the exact same species that perhaps lived 65 million years ago, but it's a very close relative, so it's something from that lineage, which is still amazing. It's evolved
a little bit.
It's evolved and adapted.
Yeah.
So even if Bigfoot, for example, and we'll use Bigfoot a lot because it's a very popular cryptid, if Bigfoot is, and there are things that look like Bigfoot in the fossil history, by the way. People are, well, we've never found it. Yeah. Starting around 2 million years ago, up until about 50,000 years ago, there were, hominids that had primitive features, on the planet still. Other human-like species that were covered with hair and looked very primitive.
Sure.
So, something like that, though, it still would have evolved. Every animal tends to evolve somewhat. Some of the oldest species we have on our planet would, like the horseshoe crabs, you can trace them back, they're basically scorpions. You can trace their lineage back 450 million years to the Silurian. But over that time period, they haven't changed much, but they've still changed. They're not exactly the same animals that lived 450 million years ago. They're just a very close version of that. So yeah, I know I kind of went the long way around the barn there, but yes, a lot of cryptids are probably prehistoric survivors. Now, I wanted to add one other quick thing before I forget, which is some skeptics have argued that a lot of these cryptids are something called cultural memories. That is, as you suggest, our ancestors lived alongside of them, did battle with them, hunted them, 10,000, 12,000 years ago. And then once they died out, they verbally passed on or mentally passed on this image of this archetypical animal down to us. But, as I think I argue in my new book, I mean, that would be something like 6,000 generations of people or something. So it's hard to prove that a cultural memory could be passed down that many times and still maintain a kind of a consistency.
Well, what's fascinating is how is it easier for them to believe a memory could be passed down than it is to believe that something that was on its way to being extinct possibly learned to coexist, cohabitate, and mate with something of a similar makeup and evolve in that fashion. It kind of like the Neanderthals. We thought that Neanderthals died out because they were stupid, when in fact we mated them out and became us. So why is it so much easier to believe that a memory exists from 6,000 generations ago instead of something adapting and evolving and mating and becoming something similar but different?
No, I'm with you. You'd have to ask them. I'm just saying that's an argument that skeptics will use.
That's ridiculous.
Bigfoot represents a cultural memory that our ancestors did encounter Bigfoot, however many tens of thousands of years ago, and then somehow that memory just stuck with us. I don't agree with it either, and frankly, it's a theory that can't be tested. So I mean, it's a theory, but there's no way to test that theory. So it's just kind of.
I can barely remember what I had for lunch.
So we have quite a few questions coming in from the chat. I would like to include some of those, get our chatters involved here. So the first one was actually two questions from Beat 3 Airspace, one of our Deep Down the Rabbit Hole Patreon patrons. She asked, okay, I have two questions for Ken. One, the hat. Where did you get the hat? And two, we've been getting really large birds here, big birds that are black. Strange. She's in Kansas, by the way. So.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. The hat I purchased in 2003 at a place called Doc's Leather in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And I had it custom made. So the hat was kind of just a big leather hat, but I had them put this skull thing on there. And it's curled up and shrunk over the years. So the brim used to be kind of out to here, and it's just kind of... But a lot of people asked for a hat just like it. I don't know. I guess you could have one made, but Doc's Leather in Toronto. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
She's reporting very large black
big
birds.
Yeah,
where
I'm
she's
sorry.
At.
Thunderbirds. Yeah, I'm sorry. Blanked out there. So first you have to acknowledge that, what are the largest known birds that are endemic to North America? Okay, so for scale, you have the California condor. It's got a wingspan of about 9.5 feet across, but we know that there's a very small population of them in California, the Grand Canyon, and Baja, so they don't travel much, and they're they're closely monitored.
They're endangered. Yeah.
So beyond that, we have things like eagles, and the largest eagles, the golden eagles, the females can have an 8-foot wingspan.
Wow.
We have large storks. Some of those can have a wingspan close to 8 feet. Pelicans can sometimes have so 8 feet is kind of the max wingspan for most North American birds. So when people report birds and estimate that birds have wingspans larger than that, and I have many reports of 10, 12, 15, 20 foot wingspans of monstrous birds, airplane-sized birds. So that's a cryptid because that doesn't fit into the paradigm of current zoology. But lo and behold, there were birds that had 18-foot wingspans in North America during the Pleistocene, and they were called teratorns, and they were big condor-like birds, much larger.
So is it possible there might be a few of those still around?
It's possible. And like I said, I have a database. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people that have had sightings. The only cautions I would put forward is, first of all, it's very hard for us to judge the size of things that are in the air unless we have some type of sense of distance and stuff. So,
right.
They are estimates on size typically. Now it's helpful when I've had reports where people said that they saw the birds flying alongside known birds like vultures, so they were able to see how much bigger it was. But yeah, there's a long history and tradition of sightings, and many Native American tribes had traditions of monstrous birds called thunderbirds because of the beating of their wings sounded like thunder, and super eagles, if you will. So that fits right into the description. Now, I don't get a lot of reports from Kansas. There are a lot of reports from Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, Alaska seem to be the 4 states with the most reports. And then I do get sightings from other states as well. I may have 1 or 2 from Kansas, Nebraska. I'd probably have to check my lists, but not as many from that region. But yeah, it sounds like a thunderbird. If you can verify that the wingspan actually is larger than 8 feet, then bingo.
Wow.
But the problem with thunderbirds is that, unlike Bigfoot, there's literally no physical evidence. I mean, you would think if there was even a small population of giant birds flying around North America, that people would eventually find their nests, the eggs or eggshells, the giant piles of bird crap on their windshield, something
right.
that would indicate something that they leave behind. And we don't have any of that. All we have are anecdotes, stories, and 1 controversial film from Illinois that was shot in 1977.
Okay, interesting. I'm in Illinois, and of course the legend around here where Shauna and I are at is the Pious Saw.
Mm-hmm.
So
and there's a misperception about the Pious Saw as well.
Oh yeah, what's up?
I've done talks in Alton about the Pious Saw. Well, the Pious Saw, the original, for people that don't know the story, there were these cliffs overlooking the Mississippi River right near Alton, Illinois, and they were ancient. No one knows how long they'd been there. They were first noticed by a missionary, I think, in the 16th century, and he had a pretty good written description of what they were. They were long animals. They had talons and a face like a man, and kind of a panther-like body and a long tail, scales. But he never described them as birds or as having wings. That interpretation appeared in the 19th century when a professor named John Russell at a college up in Alton wrote a fictional story based on the Pious Saw, and he was the one that called it the bird that devours man. He basically just made up that translation and made up the wings and the flying. So I'm not in the business of bursting bubbles, but we run into that a lot in cryptozoology, where people will hear something and then it gets repeated, and it becomes part of the fact. But it seems like the Pious Saw may have been based on more like a lake monster or a river monster in the Mississippi, as opposed to a giant bird. Nonetheless, Illinois does boast an impressive amount of thunderbird sightings, and even around Alton, where the Pious Saw legend is. So there's an interesting kind of overlap there that, that's hard to explain.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that about the Pious Saw, and like I said, I'm right here, so Alton's right down the road.
And I've been there, and I know the new version. The new version that they've replaced it's no longer the ancient version. It has wings because that's been incorporated into the legend. But you don't find any reference to that until I think 1837, when this John Russell professor guy kind of wrote this fictional story about it.
Interesting. Okay.
Wow.
So, talking about winged creatures, there is a question here from Robert Hanna. I know you talk about this. What your thoughts are on the Mothman sightings?
That's a good one. Mothman, of course, is one of the most colorful creatures in the annals of the unexplained. It's described as a 6.5 foot tall, human-like creature with bat-like wings and seemingly headless or a low-slung head, but it's got these giant red eyes, right, that glow and hypnotize people, transfix them. It's been reported to chase cars at 100 miles an hour without barely flapping its wings. It possesses a lot of features that are just honestly hard to equate to any known animal. So I personally, and I've written a book about the Mothman and similar creatures around the world, flying humanoids. They're kind of in that really fringe area of cryptozoology that seems to me more like a paranormal or a supernatural thing, as opposed to a flesh and blood animal. But again, you have possibly other things being woven together into the Mothman. For example, before the name Mothman was coined by the media, and it's a cool name, so it really stuck.
True.
But most of the newspaper articles about the Mothman creature that started appearing in the 1960s described it as the bird. the Mason County bird. And many people said it was, in fact, there were some early eyewitnesses, a guy named Thomas Urey saw it. And he said, yeah, it was basically a thunderbird. It was a giant bird. It was not a flying humanoid. So there may have been some thunderbird sightings kind of mixed in. But the Mothman is not technically a cryptid, but it is something that we investigate because of the thunderbird angle.
Okay.
And also it has some animal-like characteristics. But my conclusion is that the Mothman is a paranormal or supernatural manifestation of some type. It displays too many physical and behavioral characteristics that are just unnatural and weird. And on top of that, you have a lot of other weird aspects mixed into the mystery. You have UFO sightings and psychic phenomenon and men in black and conspiracies. And
yeah, there's so many things going on with that story. And what always fascinated me was just the sheer number of different sightings and reports. And you're saying, there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah, there are a lot of, in 1 year period, for example, November 15th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, there were something like 100 sightings that were documented by John Keel, the guy that wrote Mothman Prophecies. They seemed to really drop off dramatically after the tragedy of the Silver Bridge collapse, which 46 people drowned. And a lot of people in Point Pleasant, where the Mothman legend is prevalent, still view the Mothman as connected to the bridge collapse, either a warning or harbinger omen of this tragic event. Who knows? But that seems to be the hot period there in 66 and 67. There are still occasionally sightings. The most recent credible Mothman sighting I'm aware of was in 2011, a guy named John Hypes and his wife, and I've interviewed them.
Okay, interesting.
Following along that same line, and this is going to be very short, I was in New Jersey in 2015 or 16, I can't recall which, in a cemetery. And we caught on video, the team that I was with, something that can only be described as a pterodactyl landing in front of us and then jumping off. And it's obviously, it looks wispy, but you can see it land and you can see it take off. When the show's over, I'm going to send you that clip.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
It's in infrared, so you can't miss it. And nobody was vaping, nobody was smoking. It's not smoke. So it was in the middle of the night in New Jersey. So I just wanted to throw that in. I'm going to send it to you when the show's over. Okay.
Please do. Yeah, I'd love to take a look.
Please, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Well, Ken, I did want to get into your latest book, and we did have some questions down here about Bigfoot. Cat Gash was asking some questions. So your latest book here, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with the book, what people can expect from by picking this up.
Well, thanks. Well, the first thing I always preface by saying there's no experts in Bigfoot, because obviously we haven't found Bigfoot. So, I'm reticent to refer to myself as an expert. So it's really all speculation. In terms of everything we know about Bigfoot, it's just speculation and good guesses and theories. But what I like to tell people is that some people are more informed about the subject than others. And, from my own point of view, I've been researching Bigfoot for 40 years, ever since I was a little kid. I've subsequently traveled all over North America, from Alaska to Central America, searching in the field all over the country. I've interviewed hundreds of eyewitnesses. I've never had a sighting, but I've interviewed hundreds of people that have. And I work with most of the top Bigfoot researchers in the world. So we've kind of have a foundation of knowledge that's been built up since the 1950s and before, theories about Bigfoot. And a lot of those have been lost. And a lot of them are being bulldozed over now with the internet, because people get online and they see podcasts and no offense.
No, I totally get it.
Yours seems pretty legit so far.
I appreciate that.
Podcasts or blogs or tweets with information, and a lot of people sadly will just take everything they read at face value and say, "Oh, it says this about Bigfoot," You don't know about the sourcing.
Yeah. Or
So
some
the
article
sourcing
out there that's like top 5 characteristics of Bigfoot.
Yeah,
It's just somebody's
and
blog.
you know, keep in mind you always consider motivation, right? Why would someone want to write a story about Bigfoot and put it up on a blog? Maybe because they want thousands of people to click on their website and get some clickbait. You know, so people, yeah, it draws people in. But there's a lot of foundational information about Bigfoot. Conversely, there's a lot of bad information, misinformation, misperceptions and things, falsehoods. So the purpose of the book is to it's kind of a primer. It's two things. It's a primer for people that are interested in the subject but don't have a lot of information. It's the most accurate and indispensable information that's been gathered by the top Bigfoot investigators in the world, including some scientists and physical anthropologists that spent years and years studying the evidence and the data. And this is kind of like the consensus opinion of what Bigfoot is, trying to dispel a lot of the other stuff.
Right.
And then moreover, it's also getting rave reviews from a lot of my colleagues that are experienced Bigfoot researchers, because I really did a lot of in-depth research, interviewed a lot of people, and dug up some lesser known things and facts that even experienced Bigfooters weren't aware of. So, I mean, even if you're an experienced and you've read a lot of Bigfoot books and watched shows, you'll probably learn some things that perhaps you didn't know. So again, I can't say it's the final word, but I think it's one of the clearest and most concise, conduits of information if you're really interested in the truth behind the Bigfoot phenomenon.
Good. And we do, for our viewers, we have a link down in the description so you guys can pick up Ken's book. We do have a question here from Tammy Heitzman. It's kind of interesting. So based on your research, does it appear that Bigfoot reacts differently to women versus men?
Yes, that's a great question. It does. There have been theories for years that Bigfoot is more drawn to females because consider what, the theory behind what Bigfoot is that it's a hominin. So it's basically not a human, but something in our family tree. Similar to great apes and chimps and so on, except it walks upright. So all of the hominins, all of us put out different types of pheromones that are basically signaling mechanisms that we use to each other and to other species. And the theory behind Bigfoot is that female humans do not put out this aggressive chest beating pheromone that male humans tend to have when we go into the woods, right? We're cradling our guns and we're acting all tough and big. Come on. And women, a lot of times, they have more of a nurturing, good word, nurturing, sensitive, and it's the theory is that Bigfoot can pick up on that. And in fact, I know of a all-female Bigfoot expedition that's being organized at the moment, and kind of some pretty impressive consultants, Dr. Jeff Meldrum being one. So they're going to see what they can do with just an all-female team. And to extrapolate upon this, there's a couple of names I want to throw at you. Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey. Okay, these are two outstanding field researchers. They were both females, and Jane, of course, lived with chimpanzees, and Diane lived with gorillas, and they were readily accepted into those social structures because they were female, and they weren't as threatening to the alpha males. And in the ape world, there is an alpha male or a couple of alpha males in each troop that are, they call the shots. So if they're not threatened by you, then you could assimilate possibly into that group. So yeah, I think if you're a female, I think you have a big advantage potentially going out there in the field and seeing what you can find.
Awesome. So Vanessa, you're going right out there, right?
You know it. I would do it. It doesn't frighten me. I mean, granted, being female, not having others, I guess as long as we might not cradle our guns the same way, but we would definitely have to go out prepared, because it's not just that you're looking for that might seek you out. Other things can seek you out as well, and you have to be careful about that. But it's definitely something I would do. Wouldn't bother me a bit. I can sleep on the ground.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So the other question down there from Kat Gash, How would you explain why we have never found any remains of what we call Bigfoot? I mean, have there been any remains found? I know people find the footprints, but have
There
some
have been
remains been
alleged
found?
remains, but no, yeah, just trace evidence, no physical, and that's when it would become a scientific reality. That's a great question. I have a whole chapter dedicated to that in my new book, because it's a very complex question, but I'll try to summarize it as quick as I can. No, there have been no physical evidence. There's no physical remains of Bigfoot that have been found, or at least that have gotten into the right hands. There have been claims. Here are the reasons. I'm convinced that Bigfoot is very rare, very rare. For example, there may be as many as 1,000 bears to every single Bigfoot. So, the numbers in my book, I discuss population estimates. The best guess is probably 4,000 individuals throughout North America. So it sounds like a lot at first, but think about 4,000 spread across from Alaska to Canada to Washington to it's not a lot. But that would be the minimum population that they could have to maintain and viably breed and proliferate, continue on with the species. So they're very, very rare.
So it's just like small clusters spread around?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Now to add on to that, I also am convinced that Bigfoot has adapted behavior patterns. We talked about adaptation a little while ago. Bigfoot has adapted behavior patterns specifically to avoid humans, period. It recognizes that humans are its greatest threat, direct competition, and that we will exterminate them, right? So they live in the most remote areas that we don't go. That's borne out by most of the sightings in wilderness areas. They seem to be largely nocturnal, so they're moving around mostly at night when we're not out, especially when we're not out in the woods. And they seem to move around a lot. They seem to be very nomadic. So all of those seem like pretty smart adaptations to stay away from humans. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Bigfoot is an alpha. Would we all agree that Bigfoot is probably an alpha predator in terms of it's at the top of the food chain, right? There's not many things that can threaten it because of its physical size, right? So most animals that are at the top of the food chain, we don't find their remains in the woods. Bears, mountain lions, wolves. Why do we not find those animals in the woods? Because they don't die by accident often. They're not hunted that often. They're not hit by cars as much. So when they're dying or when they're sick, typically what they do is they hide. They hide in low brush. If any of you guys have dealt with any animal that like that, when it gets sick or it thinks it's going to die, it's going to hide its body. So it crawls into low brush, and if it dies, then it's even harder to find remains because the remains are hidden. And I have friends that work as bear biologists that have confirmed that. They never find bear remains. It's almost, it's so rare to find any part of a bear in the woods. And we know that there's 400,000 bears in North America, but we never find their remains. So I hope that answered a little bit, but I think that's the reason. They're rare and they hide themselves, and that's it,
Well, speaking of remains, let me ask you this, because, over the centuries, there have been a lot of reports about finding remains of giants, and then those remains end up going missing. Is it possible that some of these giant remains were perhaps a Bigfoot?
It's possible, sure. Sadly, we don't have, and as you said, you don't have those remains. And I know there are specialists. Hugh Newman, I know, is one guy that's written books, and he's very specialized in that area. I've come across, for example, when I was in Alaska, I came across accounts of giant human-like bodies being found. And in one case, this, as is always said to be, the Smithsonian Institute gets the remains, and there's this conspiracy theory that the Smithsonian is suppressing this giant evidence. So yeah, that's possible. And even recently, I was talking to another Bigfoot researcher, and even if somebody was walking through the woods and they saw like a Bigfoot femur, which is the biggest bone in most animals, right? A big femur laying there on the ground, they might just step over and think it's, I guess that's a cow or a bear. They wouldn't immediately think, there's a Bigfoot femur, so it's possible that people have walked right over Bigfoot remains and just said, wow, look at those big bones,
Well,
so
there's two other things too. I mean, one thing to consider, in North America, there are tunnels, mine shafts, all different types of previous transport areas that are underground that are no longer used, that could be excellent hiding places or moving through places for something like that that's adapted and shows a high intelligence, which I believe that they do. The other thing is, for those that are together that are quite possibly in small groups, who's to say that they don't bury their dead?
Yeah, that's a theory too. I meant to mention that, but they might when they're able to. And again, if my theory is correct that they have behavior patterns or avoidance behaviors, wouldn't they also hide their bodies or bury the bodies of their dead if they could, so that we wouldn't know where they are?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a possibility as well. I'm not a big conspiracy guy, so when people talk about the government has the bodies and they're in a hidden bunker, I'm no disrespect to anyone that might be listening that advocates those beliefs, but I just a lot of those stories I think are kind of far-fetched and sensational. So though I am convinced though that the government, for as much as you can put faith in our current government, may have more knowledge of these creatures than they're willing to admit. And for example, it's easy to understand why they might suppress knowledge of these creatures, because think about what would happen if suddenly they were to announce that there was a race of 9-foot-tall, giant, hairy, human-like creatures running around in the woods. What would happen? It would basically create total havoc, right?
Exactly.
Right.
People running around in the woods with guns. There would be people in panic states. The economy might collapse. Churches, it would be a social nightmare.
You just hit the nail on the head right there.
So yeah, so if they do know, then they might, but I don't think they would hide a body. I think that maybe they have more knowledge that they exist than they're willing to admit. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
But I think that you just hit the nail on the head, especially when you talked about the churches. Is I think that if the government was involved in something like this, as far as hiding information or not allowing certain things out, it's because this is, although there are so many different religions and so many different walks of life here in America and abroad, that so much is still based on the fear of religion and on scaring people with what they were taught to believe. Let's face it, Bigfoot would do that. The mere existence of it might absolutely terrify people into what all they know as to their way of life and what they've been taught their entire life.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and it would also create a problem for people that endorse like the theory of creationism, because
exactly,
if you had something that was that human-like out there, then it creates a lot of problems. Now, it's interesting. There's so many different interesting sociological aspects of this mystery. There are people, in fact, that view Bigfoot or try to reference Bigfoot as the Nephilim in the Bible, right? You hear that a lot. Oh, yeah, we talked about Bigfoot in the Bible. And so it's almost like, in a way, they're trying to assimilate themselves. They believe in Bigfoot, but they're also God-fearing people. So they're trying to assimilate those two sort of
trying to make sense of it.
Views, and put them together so that they make sense in their world. So
whatever floats about.
Well, and on that note, so Lammy Pie had a question a while back about if you believe that some of these creatures travel interdimensionally. And I know that there are some theories out there about Bigfoot maybe being interdimensional or being an alien, things like that. What do you think about some of those types of theories?
I'm not... I always tell people, nothing is impossible. I truly believe that. We certainly, if there's one thing that we know, it's that we know nothing, right? I mean, there's new things that are being found and discovered all the time. Right. There are realms in quantum physics and things that are probably far beyond our comprehension. But I find an interesting sociological thing is that virtually everyone that asks me about Bigfoot being interdimensional is someone that's in the paranormal field or is from the UFO field. And so that is their perspective, right?
Right.
All of us, either consciously or unconsciously, have biases. And those biases are developed over the course of our lives based on different influences, how we grew up and our, people that we were with, parents and experiences and all that. So, someone that spends all their time doing paranormal research, then they're looking at the world kind of through that prism. So So yeah, I typically people that are in the paranormal field are interested in the interdimensional aspect because it kind of makes sense. It's comfortable to them. It's like, okay, I'm already dealing with the spirit realm and all these other dimensions and realms. So Bigfoot could kind of fit into that. I don't really, there's not much evidence for that. The strongest argument against it is that we don't have the physical remains. That does seem just mind-boggling that we can't find a bone or something. And also the fact that that no one can get a good photograph these days. Everyone's got a camera on them, or we just don't have better. Right. We have one good film from 1967, and everything beyond that is highly controversial. Even the 67 film is actually pretty controversial. It is, yeah. So why can't we get pictures of them? Why can't we find them? And there are some rare reports of them being shot with, guns like with 50 bullets and just vanishing into thin air. But those reports are pretty rare. So, so I think Bigfoot is an unknown animal, a hominid. I think that it displays, I think the way that it's able to avoid us seems supernatural, right? So, the fact that it has these adaptations to avoid humans seem almost supernatural to us. And in fact, many Native American traditions speak of them as both spirit beings and also flesh and blood, a tribe or a species or a race that lives deep in the woods. So that's my belief. But like I said, I'm open-minded, but I don't want to go there first, because if you look at the Bigfoot evidence, everything adds up to a real animal in terms of the physical description, the behaviors that are described, the places where it's seen. All of that is pretty natural, and we now have thousands of documented eyewitness sightings that are pretty consistent in that respect.
Good. So we had some
question, though.
Yeah, no, it's a legit question, because that is a theory that a lot of people speculate upon these days. So a couple other questions here from the chat, and guys, we're probably not going to get to all of these, but we'll get to as many as we can here. So some of the viewers had some questions about other creatures. So Ravenstar's Epic Explorers asks if you've heard of the snallygaster. I know I have, having lived in Maryland. So do you know much about that one?
Isn't that like the Jersey Devil, basically? Just a Maryland version of it. It's a winged creature, correct?
Right, it's a winged creature. Yeah, it's kind of Jersey Devilish. And there were, we could talk about it right now, because there were Tanya and Lambie Pie had asked about the Jersey Devil, so we just kind of mesh all that together.
So similar. So those creatures are kind of chimeras. So they combine, they're winged creatures, but they also have dragon-like aspects and some mammalian or bird-like. The Jersey Devil, of course, is described as a 3 to 5 foot tall kangaroo-like animal with bat-like wings, a long snake-like tail, devil's tail with a fork, horns, glowing eyes, and all that kind of stuff. Snallygaster is probably similar. They're probably, again, kind of in that Mothman fringe area, because the physical descriptions don't relate to anything in the natural world. And typically the sightings are very supernatural in nature. Like for the Jersey Devil, most of the sightings occurred in January of 1909 over like a 2 or 3 week period. And it was shooting fire out of its mouth and melting railroad tracks and disappearing in a puff of smoke. And so it had all these kind of amorphic qualities to it. So now there could be some strange winged animal at the root of the stories. Maybe some of the Thunderbird accounts, again, got kind of mixed up or were at the root of some of those stories. So this is a word I use probably too much, is composite identity, meaning that, again, there's always a bunch of influences that are kind of being drawn together. And so there might be an unusual animal at the root of it, but some of it's going to be folklore. Some of it's going to be, people just making up stories and embellishing stories. People misidentifying known animals. That happens a lot. So probably a little bit of both, but I mean, they're cool legends. I mean, they're iconic legends. And I think it is important that all cultures in America, we sort of embrace the weirdness of our legendary creatures, and they're an important part of who we are. So.
Yeah, and it seems like every location has their, legend and folklore that they that they love to cling to and pass on to the next generation. And yeah, it does make you wonder how much of that does get embellished. But
so there's probably something behind it.
Yeah,
but,
there's always a nugget of truth in there somewhere, I believe.
Not necessarily all the fantastical, things that are attributed to those creatures. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Vanessa, since we're winding down, I know I've kind of monopolized here a little bit, but do you have any final questions?
No, you're all good.
All good? Okay.
No, yeah, no.
We got about 10 minutes left, so.
I've enjoyed this just because I love learning new things, and Mike and I were talking before you came on. I'm not as well versed as Mike is in many of these, stories and such. So anything that I can take away from it and build my repertoire of knowledge, I'm totally cool with. I do have one question for you. One place I've always been drawn to is the Carpathian Mountains, and I will go, even if it means going by myself someday. I don't know why I'm drawn to there. Is there anything in that area that leans more towards what you and I were talking about before the show as the fantastical?
Gosh, I'm ashamed to admit this. I think my grandfather was actually born in the Carpathian Mountains. Is that in like Romania?
Yeah, that area.
My grandfather was born in the Carpathian Mountains of Western Ukraine in 1897. So I have Ukrainian roots from that region.
Cool.
In the Carpathian Mountains, there are accounts of quote unquote wild men. And whenever you hear the phrase wild men, it's typically referring to Bigfoot. Long before the name
wild men. Woo!
Whatever floats your boat,
I know.
Long before names like Bigfoot and Sasquatch were part of the common vernacular, people in the olden days would describe them as wild men, and they would always say they were covered with hair, they were man-like, they lived in the woods, right? The Green Man is a very prevalent legend in European folklore. It's kind of along the same lines. Satyrs, things like that. So yes, there are sightings of wild men from the Carpathians, which are basically like, you could call them Bigfoot or Yetis. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of the Asian wild man reports, though similar to Bigfoot, seem to be more human-like, more like, I won't say Neanderthal, because we've kind of figured out nowadays that Neanderthals were basically humans, right? They were just a little bit more robust than they were, but they were very intelligent, had culture and all that stuff. So, but reports of Asian wild men, like in the Carpathians, they describe them as having primitive tools, almost like a primitive language, and they almost interact with the locals sometimes. Like the locals that live in remote areas, they'll come in at night and they'll sit around the campfire and grunt and scratch themselves, or they'll scavenge food from the edge of the camp. So they don't seem to be as afraid of us. So they, one of the theories is that they could be a surviving population of Homo erectus. Homo erectus, I know it's a Beavis and Butthead moment here. Homo erectus was a human-like ancestor that was very bestial in its appearance, definitely not as intelligent as us, but lived up until about 50,000 years ago and alongside human beings. So it's not impossible that something like that could have survived in the remote mountains of Asia and Europe.
Wow, I'm one of these days.
Yep.
One of these days.
Bucket list item for Vanessa.
Absolutely. Plus, I want to see the wolves.
Right.
Yes, I'm a wolf girl.
And the vampires, right?
Oh, honey, don't even get me started on vampires.
the Verkalox.
Oh,
vampires.
Yeah, I have a shelf from Romania that had Vlad the Impaler's embossed shipping tag on it that I got at a Goodwill.
Oh, wow.
In Oklahoma. It's in my dining room. So yeah, vampiric stuff seems to migrate towards me, even though he wasn't technically vampire.
Yeah, well, cryptozoologists don't typically study vampires, but I recently I have an upcoming TV episode where I had to study up on vampires, and I was surprised to learn that even in modern times, there are still little villages there in Eastern Europe in the Carpathians where the people will still dig up the corpses of their relatives thinking that they're vampires and dismember the bodies, cut off the heads and burn the hearts and things like that. So
absolutely,
it's amazing, but some of those traditions are still going on.
Still hanging around today. Jeez.
You should have called me, because I have to tell you, I've spent so much time in New Orleans, and it has such a rich history.
Oh yeah,
of that lore. And I have been, and I'm not afraid of anything. I mean, I'll go anywhere. I don't care. But I have been in certain places in New Orleans that I walked in and I walked right back out.
Wow.
Because the inner alarm system just started pinging, and I just knew there was something very not right in here. And that doesn't happen a whole lot of places. It happened in 3 separate places down there.
Yeah, it's definitely has a tradition or history of that,
yes.
relationships to the voodoo and the occult and all that stuff, for sure.
Very much so.
Vampirism.
So, yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my thing.
So, Ken, with the last few minutes that we have in the show, what do you have coming up? Projects on tap, events you're doing, books coming out, anything like that?
Well, just the new book. I'm promoting it. I don't really have any lectures coming up this year outside of San Antonio, Texas, where I live. But next year I'm going to be kind of on tour around the country. I'm speaking at a number of Bigfoot conferences around the country in Texas, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, all over the place. I'll be doing a lot of Bigfoot talks. As I said, I'm just kind of promoting the new book and lecturing right now. And I do have an appearance on a TV show coming up. I can't really, they don't let you talk about that stuff until it's about to air. But, I appear regularly on the History and Travel channels. So if you watch any show about cryptozoology or monsters, you might catch me on there.
Yeah, and I thought it was pretty interesting, your show on Alaska, because I was up there this past year. Mm-hmm. I had spent 3 years there when I was in the Air Force, but I thought your show was pretty interesting because they were throwing you out there into some pretty remote places, and you're up there for quite a while, right?
Yeah, spent the better part of 2015 up there, and it was a dream come true. Got to travel around that majestic state, and of course, I was a little bit outside my comfort zone because in addition to cryptids, we also did an episode on UFOs and one on ghosts and, some of those things. But so many people vanish there without a trace. It's pretty mind-boggling, the percentage of people that vanish up there compared to the rest of the United States. And there's obvious reasons for that. It's a pretty treacherous wilderness, but
and huge. People don't realize how big Alaska actually
massive.
is.
Yeah, 600,000 square miles and about 1 person per square mile. Population is about 3 million lakes.
Yeah, it's massive.
About that, there's
it's
3 million lakes.
Yeah.
So it's massive. Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
I want to go.
I recommend, having lived there, I recommend going during the summer.
It's like the Carpathians, only just, in North America.
Right.
I love this snow. I'm fine with it.
Well, when you have a winter where it snows like 123, 128 inches, something like that, the 1 year I was up there, it was too much.
We had some extremes. One of the first nights we were filming with the wind chill, it was 30 degrees below zero.
Yep,
so,
been there, done that a few times.
I had the right clothing on as far as base layers and parkas, but whenever I had to take my gloves off to activate all the gadgets, my hands would literally freeze instantly and I couldn't move my thumbs. And moreover, all our gadgets weren't working because it was so cold that the batteries were going dead and everything was malfunctioning. So it was an adventure.
Yeah, it's crazy up there. Yeah, people don't realize how cold it really gets and, just how remote it really is. I mean, they see it on a map, but they just don't really realize. So
I just want 2 weeks in a cabin with a fireplace, food, and snow. That's all I want. I don't ask for much.
So, all right. So, Ken, we have here's your book, the latest one more time, because you have several. And we did, for the viewers, you guys have a link down below to go ahead and pick that up. Where else can people find you, Ken?
I have a website, kengerhard.com, and I'm also active on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So people can pick their poison, however they want to get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from them.
Awesome. All right. Well, go check out Ken's site, check out his book, and go check him out at an event this coming year. So, Ken, great to have you on the show. Really appreciate it.
This was
Thank
awesome.
you, guys.
Thank
a
you
lot of
very
fun.
much.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I'm going to send you that video, okay?
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much,
All
Ken.
right,
You have a
guys.
great night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to
care.
everyone who listened in. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.